My name is Dr. Amy Brown and I'm a Senior Lecturer in the Department of Public Health and Policy Studies. My research explores the very topical area of how babies are fed during the first year of life. Often in the headlines in the newspapers, breastfeeding, formula feeding, how babies are introduced to solid foods. My research explores a new area known as baby-led weaning, which is a different approach to introducing babies to solid foods. Typically, when you think of a baby being introduced to solid foods, you think of a baby sat in a high chair being spoon-fed purees. Pureed apple, pureed banana, perhaps a pureed Sunday dinner. But the mum or the dad is sat there spoon-feeding them. Baby-led weaning is a different approach. And what baby-led weaning follows is the idea that now babies are introduced to solid foods at around 6 months of age. Babies are able to feed themselves. Babies can sit in a high chair and they can pick up food, place it in their mouths and eat it perfectly fine. The baby-led approach suggests that rather than pureeing and being spoon-fed, babies are offered family foods, whether that's a piece of banana, some cucumber, some bread, maybe even a sandwich, a wrap, spaghetti bolognese, and they feed themselves. When a baby is around 6 months old, they're not going to be able to use cutlery to feed themselves, so they will be using their hands and it will get a little bit messy. But what proponents of the baby-led method believe is that perhaps this approach, where they're allowed to self-feed, encourages them to develop healthier eating habits and might even impact on their weight. I came across the method a few years ago and I discovered that there was a book. There were forums, there were websites, there were lots of internet pages of parents who had adopted this method and were following it. But as a researcher, what I also realised that there was no empirical research in this area. And I could see that parents were following it, parents were concerned or anxious about its potential outcomes, and also health professionals were getting a lot of questions about the method. But without an empirical basis, without Department of Health guidelines, they were unable to really advise parents on the method. What I was interested in is whether these beliefs that this method could affect child eating behaviour and weight were actually true. So we set up a longitudinal study exploring outcomes for babies who were introduced to solid foods via a spoon and purees or who were baby-led. We collected some initial data when they were 6 to 12 months old, so just starting the weaning process, and looked at what they were eating, when they were eating, how they were being fed. And then we followed them up at about 18 to 24 months and looked at their eating behaviour, how fussy they were, whether they could control their intake of food or whether they tended to eat too much or too little. And also we looked at their weight. And what we found was that babies who were following a baby-led weaning method indeed were less likely to be overweight, and they were more likely to be able to control their appetite, so they didn't overeat, and they were less likely to be fussy. Now this is very interesting because it supports ideas about why the method might work. At first we thought it could be to do with other factors. We know that babies who are breastfed are less likely to be overweight, and baby-led weaned babies are more likely to be breastfed. But this didn't explain it. Also, we know that babies who are introduced to solid foods at around 6 months rather than earlier are less likely to be overweight. And we know again that baby-led babies tend to start solids at around 6 months rather than earlier. But again, this didn't explain it. So we thought maybe it was something about the interactions, the experiences during that meal time that were affecting child eating behaviour at a later date. We know with older children that during meal times, if a mother is very controlling with how much the child eats, maybe pressurising them to eat more, restricting their intake, rather than letting them listen to their appetite, those children are more likely to go on to be fussy eaters or have problems with their weight, or be unable to control their intake of food and eat too much when they're a little bit older. And we thought that maybe these same ideas could be applied to the weaning process. So the baby-led babies had more control over their intake of food compared to the spoon-fed babies. When you're spoon-feeding a baby, it's much easier to encourage them to eat that little bit more. Finish the portion. You might do this deliberately because perhaps there are some beliefs sometimes that if you encourage a baby to eat lots of solids, they'll start sleeping through the night or they'll be a lot more settled. These haven't been shown to be true, but sometimes parents report trying to get them to eat more because of this reason. Alternatively, you might not be trying to do that. You might really be trying to be responsive with your baby and just feed them until they turn their head away. But perhaps the point when they turn their head away might not be, I've had enough now, thanks, but oh no, I can't take another bite of that. Whereas with the baby-led baby, perhaps they stop eating much sooner. In addition, we know that if a baby self-feeds, it's more likely to be a slower process. The baby's got to pick up the food, they've got to get it to their mouth, they've got to chew it, compared to being spoon-fed a puree, which is much more easier to swallow. So perhaps baby-led weaned babies are taking a much longer time of their meal times. And we know as adults, this is a good thing. Adults who eat more slowly are more likely to recognise when they're full and eat less and stop eating when they feel those initial feelings of being full, compared to someone who eats a meal very, very quickly. Alternatively, it might be to do with something to do with seeing food in its whole form, its real form. So they see a banana, they understand what a banana looks like, tastes like, feels like. Perhaps they learn more about the properties of food and how it might make them feel, how full it makes them feel, compared to a baby who's been spoon-fed a puree. Now, this research is very interesting. It's received a lot of media attention. It's been in the main newspapers in the UK. It's been in the HuffPost. It's been in the New Zealand Herald. It's been publicised across Europe, in Africa, really all over the world. It sparked a lot of interest because of the novelty of it, and also the papers have often sensationalised headlines saying that spoon feeding makes babies obese. We're not saying that in the slightest. We're saying that there's something about the baby-led method that might encourage babies to only eat until they've had enough, or to explore a wider range of foods. And maybe it's a method that could, with some more research, be adopted into health guidance. What we need to do now is undertake much more rigorous research, bigger samples, repeated samples, because we know that health professionals want information about this method, whether it's a good or a bad idea, and we know parents are following the method and would like some guidance. But without these initial studies, the Department of Health will be unable to make a statement on whether they believe it is something that could be followed, or indeed the principles of it, such as making sure you're feeding responsively and feeding a wide variety of foods and family foods and foods in their whole form to your baby, alongside any purees. We know that it's something we definitely want to do more research on and hopefully plan to be doing soon.